Well, hello everybody and Happy New Year. We're starting a new study today with the New Year 2019. This is for Tuesday, January the 15th of 2019. And the book we're doing is 1st and 2nd Samuel, book 1 of 11. Yes, there's going to be 11 workbooks. But it's okay. We're going to take a chapter a week and we're going to learn a lot about 3 characters. First, what the books are named after. We're going to learn about the man Samuel. And then we're going to learn about Samuel was the last judge of Israel. And then we're going to learn about when it went into the monarchy. We're going to learn about the first king, who was King Saul over Israel. And then by the time we get into 2 Samuel, we'll be talking only about King David, who most people recognize to be the king of Israel, a very famous king of Israel. So originally, 1st and 2nd Samuel was one work. In the Hebrew Old Testament, it was on one scroll. It was just a continuation of Samuel. But when the Hebrew Testament was translated into the Greek Septuagint, then they made it into 2 books because of the length of it. So that's how we got 1st and 2nd Samuel, but really it's just the works of the life and ministry time of the prophet Samuel, who was also the last judge of Israel. So let's get started. And first we're going to talk about the birth of Samuel in chapter 1 of 1 Samuel. But I also wanted to give you a little bit of a historical context so that we can really feel what's going on when the events of this book happen. For those of you who have been doing home studies with me, we did the book of Exodus, and we saw when Moses led the children out of the Egyptian bondage, after they'd been in Egyptian bondage for 400 years, and we saw them go through the wilderness wanderings, and we saw the covenant, the covenant be made with the children of Israel on Mount Sinai. And Moses gave us the books of the law, which is called the Torah. That's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And the final book of those 5 is Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy is a second giving of the law. It's Moses repeating everything to them again before they entered into the promised land. Moses died and did not take them into the promised land, but he anointed Joshua to take them in. And then we did study the book of Joshua, and it was just so amazing, possessing the promised land and the division among the 12 tribes of Israel, the inheritance that they got in the promised land. And but there were some key verses I want to bring out. From Deuteronomy 10, verse 20 and 21, Moses was telling them what they needed to be sure that they continued in. And he said they needed to continue to fear God, to serve him, to swear by his name. But do you know another thing he said? They needed to cling to him, not be tempted and distracted by all these other gods that were in the nations around them, but to literally hold on for life, to cling to the Lord. And he repeated that in Deuteronomy 13:4 when he said to follow him, to keep his commandments, listen to him, serve him, and cling to him. And when Moses came along and he was getting older, and he gave them a farewell address, the children of Israel, after they had settled in the promised land. He gave them a word as well. And in Joshua 23, 6 through 8, he told them to keep and do the law of Moses, and that they weren't to associate with the other nations or mention their gods. But what were they to do? I bet you know, cling to the Lord their God. So, there you have it. That's what Israel was designed to do, the people of God. That's what we're designed to do. We are designed to cling to him, to hold on to his teachings, and to cling to him and not turn to these other ways of the world tells us to how to handle things. Well, we need to go to God. We need to cling to God. He is our maker. He's our creator. He's our sustainer. And he will get us through everything. And that's what Hannah teaches us as we look into her life today. But some of the key phrases, when you get into right after Joshua, it goes into the time of the judges. And so what would happen is there would be this cycle. The children of Israel would not do those things. They would not cling to God. They wouldn't do the things that they've been instructed to do by Moses and Joshua. They would turn and associate with these other nations and go after their gods. They would get into idolatry. So the Lord would allow them to be taken captive by their oppressors, and they would be oppressed. And in their oppression and distress, they would call out to the Lord. They would tell him they were sorry, and they would ask for his help. And every time he would help them. And the way he would deliver them is he would raise up a judge. And that judge would deliver them from their enemies. And that judge would bring about stability in the Lord again. And as long as the judge lived and they had that godly leader, they would do well. But when the judge would die, they were back to their old ways again. Then they would get in trouble again. Then they would get oppressed again. Then they would call out to the Lord, and the Lord would raise up another judge. So this is how the cycle went. And it went on like this for 400 years. And it was extremely dark in this time when Samuel starts. We were in the period of Judges, and it's just a dark time. And they were under oppression and these different things, and it was time for God to raise up another judge. But God wanted it to be Samuel, and God wanted Samuel to be raised up in the ways of the Lord from a young age. So he, as we've been looking at before, he looked to find that person that Samuel would come through. And he saw, his eyes go to and fro throughout the earth, looking for someone that he can fully support, whose heart belongs fully to him. We know that verse from, where is that verse? 2 Chronicles 16:9, if you want to look that verse up. But so anyway, the thing was, Hannah was not able to have children. Her womb had been closed by the Lord. But he was using that time to get her ready, because her heart had to be ready to not hold on to Samuel once she received the gift of a babe, of a son. But she was to give him back to the Lord and allow the Lord to form him for his purposes. So that's where we're at. So let's get started. Get your Bibles out. And let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 1. All right. 1 Samuel chapter 1. And let's begin to read. Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Joram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. Well, when you look at his chronological background, he's actually from the tribe of the Levites. You can find this in 1 Chronicles 6, 16 through 30. But, sorry about the cough. Let me get a drink. But, he did live in the land of Ephraim, the allotted portion land of Ephraim, because the tribe of Levi, they had cities, Levitical cities, designated to them in every part of the land of Israel. So they were from the land of Ephraim, but they were from a Levitical city in Ephraim, and he was of the tribe of Levi. But anyway, which would mean Samuel also would be in the priestly line, being his son. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other, Pnina. And Pnina had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Shiloh was where the tabernacle had been permanently set up for the tribes of Israel to worship, and these Levitical priests would go up every year at the appointed time for them and make sacrifice. Well, that's what he was going to be doing. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord there. Now we're going to learn more about these 2 guys, the 2 sons of Eli, in the next chapter and in chapter 4. So it's significant that their names have already been mentioned, and we will learn more about them. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Pnina, his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters. But to Hannah, he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had closed her womb. Well, sometimes one of the first questions is, boy, in the Old Testament, it seemed like these guys would have more than one wife. So was polygamy okay back then? Well, polygamy was never endorsed or said to be okay in the scriptures. And later on, Jesus in Matthew 19 answered that question, saying that it has always been the intent of the Lord for a man to have one wife and to be with his wife and to be one flesh. And so it's not that it was the design of God, but it happened. And one reason it could have happened here would be that Hannah is mentioned as his wife first, and then Pnina. And because Hannah did not have children, most likely the union between Pnina and Elkanah was for children, for childbearing, because it was so important for a man to continue and to have an heir. And we saw that with Abraham and Sarah and Hagar in Genesis, and we see it in several places. So that would happen a lot of times when a woman couldn't bear children, that another woman would be brought in to bear children. But the problem was, one of these women had his children and the other woman had his heart. And Pnina had his children, but Hannah had his heart. He loved her. And so he would give her a double portion. So he publicly was displaying that love for her when they would go up. However, she had a rival in Pnina. In verse 6, it says, her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. Now, I don't know what kind of things Pnina said to Hannah to bitterly provoke her, but it was because the Lord had closed her womb, so it must have had something to do with that. And, she could have said, I wonder why God hasn't blessed you with children. Do you have some secret sin nobody knows about but God? Is He punishing you? A lot of times women who couldn't bear children were thought to be under a curse because God had said He would bless the womb of His children in Deuteronomy in the law of Moses. So if you didn't have a blessed womb, then people kind of assumed that you weren't going to get one and that you were under some kind of curse from God. So there's no telling what kind of harmful things that Pnina was saying to Hannah, but it did stir her up and it hurt her because it says, it wasn't a one-time thing. In verse 7 it said, it happened year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her. So she wept and would not eat. So He gives her a double portion of meat. She has no interest in eating it because her rival, Pnina, is hounding her and provoking her and upsetting her about the fact that the Lord had closed her womb. And so this was an ongoing thing between these two women. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, not too sensitive, I think you guys will agree. Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? I don't know. Do we live in the same household? Do you know what's going on year after year? Do you know that I haven't born a child? What is wrong with you that you don't know I am sad? And then his next question, am I not better to you than 10 sons? Well, according to Proverbs 30, let me see what the reference is. Proverbs 30, 30, verse 15 and 16. There's some things listed that will not be satisfied. And then it says 4 things that'll not say enough. And the first one is Sheol, the underground, the underworld. And then the barren womb is mentioned, along with the earth drinking water and fire that can't be quenched. So, no, I don't think the love of a husband is going to replace that womb that wants to bear a child. But I'm sure he meant well. And thank God we don't have Hannah responding in any way to that. We just have her turning to the Lord with all this pain. So let's continue to read. Then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh, so that's good. She did finally eat and drink. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come to his head. Now, when she mentioned a razor not coming to his head, she was referring to the vow of a Nazarite, which was in the law of Moses. When something was completely consecrated to the Lord, then there were different laws of the vow of a Nazarite, and not bringing a razor to the head was one of them. Now, it came about as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart. Only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Then Eli said to her, "How long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you." But Hannah replied, "No, my Lord, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured my soul out before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant as a worthless woman, for I have spoken until now out of my great concern and provocation." Then Eli answered and said, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you have asked of him." Okay, so Hannah is pouring her heart out before the Lord. Have you had a time when that's the kind of prayer that you prayed, where you emptied everything out to the Lord? Well, I know I have, and it's a beautiful thing when you can pray in that way. Let's look at a few verses. We had some in our homework, and I just want to go over a few of those with you. Okay. Psalm 55:22. Cast your burden upon the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. Isaiah 26:3. The steadfast of mind you will keep in perfect peace, because he trusts in you. 1 Peter 5:7. Casting all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. And then this is definitely one that you should write down and even memorize for your prayer life. Philippians 4:6-7. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And so we need to just pour our heart out to the Lord, and just cast those burdens. Hannah's was trying to have a child, and I don't know what your burden is today, but you know what it is, and the Lord knows what it is. And so we need to just pour our heart out to the Lord. Just empty all that anxiety and those burdens upon him, and he wants to carry them. He wants you to vent to him, and just have a heart of attitude and a heart of thanksgiving, and just look to him, cling to him, as we saw in those early scriptures. Cling to him, trust in him, wait on him in prayer, as Hannah did. Well, let's finish reading what went on here. Then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned again to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah had relations with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Yes, he did. It came about in due time, after Hannah had conceived, that she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, because I have asked of him from the Lord. Then the man Elkanah went up with all his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay the vow. Well, she conceived, and there's 9 months to carry a child, and so forth. So a year's already gone by. It's time to go make the yearly sacrifice again. But Hannah didn't go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned. Then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. She knew that when she finally took him up, she was going to leave him there. So Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Remain until you've weaned him. Only may the Lord confirm his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And most people believe that that would have been between the age of 3 and 5, that she would have taken him up to the Lord. Now, when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, although the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. She said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I'm the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I ask of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord. And he, little H, worshipped the Lord there, which seems to indicate to me that it was young Samuel who worshipped the Lord, as his mother probably told him so many times that he belonged to the Lord, that he was an answer to her prayer, and that he was dedicated to the Lord all the days of his life. And there would come a time where he would go and stay at the house of the Lord, and this was the time. And you know, it'll tell us later that she made little coats for Samuel and would continue to go up and take these to him and visit with him. And so she stayed in contact with him, which is a precious thing. And next week, our lesson will start in chapter 2, where she has her song of thanksgiving. It goes through the first 10 verses. So next week's lesson starts with Hannah's song of praise and thanksgiving. But we're not going to discuss it today. We're going to end at chapter 1. Our homework did. But I just want to come with you and make a little bit of application in regard to what went on in this chapter. I thought we'd talk a minute about that jealousy problem between Pnina and Hannah, because it's easy to envy others. It's easy to be jealous. It's a deed of the flesh. It's something that our natural man naturally does. We feel jealousy, we feel envy of other people and their blessings, or however it may make us feel threatened by them. And I just want to talk about the contrast between the way Pnina handled her jealousy, because obviously she was jealous of Hannah having Samuel's love, because She provoked her because she irritated her on purpose. She was her rival. And so the way she dealt with it was to lash out, was to act out with jealousy and dissension and these kind of things. And Hannah handled hers differently. She handled her feeling that her husband was a little insensitive to her need to have a baby, and her emotions of pnina, insulting her and provoking her and saying all these hurtful things to her about the Lord closing her womb. She took all those things and poured her heart out to the Lord. She didn't take it anywhere but to the throne of God. She was obeying those commands of Moses and Joshua. She was clinging to the Lord her God. So I thought I'd read a few verses about jealousy and this kind of thing that we also looked up in our homework, in our workbook. If any of you guys want workbooks, I do mail them out to people who request them. So I can get you a workbook in the mail if you'll just write me a messenger or even under my YouTube and somehow get my email. I'll give you my email address, which would be the easiest way for you to send me your email, and then give me your physical address where I can mail you a book. But my email address is doggie, D-O-G-G-I-E, Grace, G-R-A-C-E, at msn.com. doggiegrace@msn.com. So you just feel free to ask for a book. But in the area of pouring our heart out to the Lord, let's look at some verses, shall we? Okay. First of all, if you are jealous of someone who has a blessing that you don't have, we need to listen to what the Lord said in Matthew 20, verse 15. He said, "Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own? Or is your eye envious because I am generous?" In James 3:16, it says that where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder in every evil thing. Because that root of jealousy, it will bring about a lot of problems. And then in James 4:2, it says you lust and you don't have, so some commit murder. You're envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. And you don't have because you don't ask. You don't go to God and ask for your needs. You turn to other people, or you turn to other things, or you just self-loathe. And you don't have peace and you don't have contentment because you haven't asked and you haven't been to the Lord. You're not clinging to the Lord. The definition of love in 1 Corinthians 13:4 tells us that love is kind and is not jealous. In Galatians 5:26, right after it's listed the deeds of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit, it says, "Let us not become boastful, challenging one another, or envying one another." In 1 Peter 2:1, it says, "Put aside all malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander." And then Philippians 4:11 talks about Paul saying that he had learned to be content in whatever circumstance he was in. He talked about that he had learned how to live well in prosperity that God blessed him with, but he had also learned to live in poverty, which the Greek word used meant total absence of food, shelter, clothing, poverty. Because sometimes Paul was without all those things, and sometimes he had blessings. Sometimes he was up and sometimes he was down. And he had learned the secret of being content in all situations. And that's what we can learn. We can learn because, you know, the thing when I was reading about Hannah that I think was so precious, I want to go back and pick up on it because I didn't stop at the time and talk about it. But it said that she said, "Let your maidservant find favor in your sight." So the woman went her way and ate. This is after Eli had told her to go in peace. And her face was no longer sad. Now, when she began her prayer time with God, she was greatly distressed. And she wept bitterly to the Lord when she poured her heart out. But when she finished her prayer time, although nothing had changed in her circumstances, she ate and her face was no longer sad. Well, I thought I would give you guys a personal testimony here. Those who know me know this story well, but some who may be watching this video and don't really know me would maybe not know this story. But it took me years to have a child. It took me 7 years to get pregnant, and I was definitely relating to these women in the Bible who had years of barrenness, because I didn't understand why I couldn't get pregnant. It was very difficult, but we finally did have our firstborn son, Brandon, who is about, I think he's 36 now. But then, about 5 years later, I had another pregnancy. And I was in the latter part of my 5th month, going into my 6th month, and I was having a sonogram done at a regular office visit, and they said that they couldn't find the heartbeat. And, you know, they looked and they looked, and they verified that the heart wasn't beating. And then I was told, you know, that I needed to be induced into labor and get the baby out of me because the baby wasn't alive. I had a hard time with that. So I spent about 3 days weeping and crying out to God and believing that even if he was dead, God could raise the dead and give him life. And I just believed that I would go back in to get a second sonogram, and I believed with all of my heart, I could already see it in my eye of faith, that the sonogram was going to show a healthy heartbeat. Well, I didn't go back to my same doctor. I went to a radiologist I knew at a local hospital, and I knew she would tell me the truth, and she would really take her time to tell me the truth. And Charlie and I and our pastor at the time all went to the hospital for that second sonogram. And I went in there full of faith and expectation that God had turned things around and that my baby was going to be alive and have a healthy heartbeat. But I got the sad news that indeed there was not a heartbeat, and that I needed to have the baby removed from me. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? I had a very difficult time dealing with that. And it was a very emotional time. And anyway, I felt like, okay, even my pastor consulted me, Brenda, you need to just follow the advice of your doctors because you don't want to poison your system with this dead fetus, which I know was my baby. And so I had to go into labor. I had to go into forced labor. And that's hard. I was on a floor where live babies were being born around me. I could hear them crying when they were born in all the rooms around. And it didn't happen fast. It didn't happen easy. For some reason, I wouldn't dilate. The baby would not come, even though they were giving me all kinds of Pitocin and things to make it happen and to expel it from my body. My body was not cooperating. So I had a lot of complications and a long, hard day of about 16 hours before I gave birth to my baby boy, Dustin. And the Lord gave me a really, really sweet and understanding nurse who kind of knew by the way I was wanting to stay awake, by the way I was wanting to see my baby, by the way I was wanting to hold my baby, by the way I wanted to validate his life and everything about him, that I would want to see my baby and to hold my baby. And so she brought him all wrapped in his little blanket and put him in my arms, and I got to talk to him and so forth. And my mom, my sister-in-law, and my husband were there also to see him. So we all got to see Dustin and then to let him go back to be prepared because we were going to have a funeral for him in a couple of days. And we did the whole thing. We had a ceremony, about 60 people attended, and we buried him. And we go back from time to time and we see his graveside. But anyway, I wanted to tell you about pouring my heart out, and I wanted to tell you about the peace of God that passes all understanding, because I had brought my Bible and a ledger and a pen in my suitcase and a new gown to put on. I don't know why I had, but I had. I had prepared in that kind of way, even within all of my distress. And I went to my regular room after the long day and finally delivering Dustin. And then I think it was 2 hours to get the placenta out. It was some kind of day of suffering. But I had gone to my regular room, and then I had gotten a few hours of sleep. And when the dawn of the new day, it was the springtime, it was April 22nd that I had him. So the dawn of April 23rd, when the sun started breaking through my hospital window, I felt, without asking for it, the presence of God in such a strong, intangible way. I really felt like he was going to show himself right there to me in bodily form. It was so incredible. And so I called out to a nurse on my button and asked her if she would please get my Bible and my ledger and my pen and my gown and everything out of my suitcase. And she did that for me. And as I sat there and I began to read, I was just, flipping through my Bible like we do. I guess I'll read a psalm. I need to hear from God. And he took me to 1 Samuel. I think it was chapter 22. We'll get to it eventually. I'm not real sure where it was, but I know it was David. It's probably 2 Samuel, because it was after David had a baby with Bathsheba, and the baby was sick and expected to die. And he prayed and he fasted for 7 days, believing what I was, that God would not allow that baby to die, that God would give him life and heal him. And he had that kind of fasting and prayer going on. And then the baby died. He did die. And I guess I had read these words before, but they had never really applied to me personally like they did that morning. And the fact that God took me there without me looking at a concordance or trying to find it, I was just flipping through and reading different things. And I know the Lord took me there. And it was David, after the baby died, saying, you know, his servants were worried about him because he hadn't been eating when the baby was alive. Oh my gosh, what's he going to do now that the baby did die? But when they got to him, they saw that he had gotten up, washed his face, anointed himself, and he was eating a meal. And they were like in shock. And they're like, why are you, now that the baby died, why are you up and worshiping God and eating? And he said, well, as long as he was alive, I thought there was a chance that God may save him. But now that he's gone, I know he won't come back to me. But one day I will go to him. And you know, that's just kind of a given. People are like, oh, I lost my baby, but one day I'll be with them again. No, I saw it in the Word of God. It was a rhema Word of God for me. I cannot tell you how my spirit began to soar, how my countenance changed from being so sad to being so happy. I wanted to do what David did. I was like, I want to go over to the sink. I want to wash my face. I want to put some makeup on. I'm going to change into my other gown I brought. I'm going to get out of these hospital robe. And I am going to worship God. And I worshiped God in such an intimate way. It was such a beautiful time with the Lord. And I called that nurse back in there and I said, can I have a cup of coffee? And she said, well, sure, if you feel like coffee, I'll get you some coffee. So I rolled that table over to me. I had my cup of coffee. I had my journal and my pen, and I began to write a eulogy to my son, Dustin Chase Lemoyne. And I got it ready to be read at his funeral 2 days after that. And I gave it the verse and some of that to my pastor. And I don't know, I can't explain it because it is truly what Philippians 4, 6, and 7 says. Peace that passes all understanding. I could not explain that. I couldn't have made that happen for anything. I couldn't have. It was God himself and his grace and his presence and his love and his comfort. And I was clinging to him. And he gave me contentment. I felt so content to go home with my firstborn son, Brandon, and my husband, Charlie, and my parents were still alive. And I just counted my blessings. And I knew that Dustin was with the Lord. And I knew that I had birthed the son into the kingdom of God. He wasn't just a waste. He was a soul. He is in the kingdom of God now. And I will see him again. And so I just wanted to share that. I relate to Hannah in the years of barrenness because of my first son. And then I relate to those who have lost a child because I did lose Dustin and I have a son in heaven. And then I relate to those who have adopted sons because years later I was given the name of an adoption agency in Missouri. We lived in Texas at the time. And we adopted our son Aaron. And those of you who know me know how much joy Aaron has brought to our lives. And we adopted him, and Brandon was then 9 years old. So Brandon did get a brother, and God did give me a son in the place of Dustin. So I have a biological, got one in heaven, and an adopted son. And I am so content, and I am so blessed. and God has been so good to me. But he just showed up in such a time of distress, and he'll do that for you. Whatever you're dealing with today, unload your burdens to the Lord. Pour your heart out to the Lord. Seek his word. Seek his word, and he will give you answers. He will give you manna. He will sustain you. He will comfort you. And I just pray that if you don't know him, of course you can't trust him if you don't know him. But I pray that if you don't know him, that you will do what Romans 10:9 and 10 says, that you'll believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, and you will confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord, Lord of the earth, Lord of the world, and Lord of your life, and that you will begin a path of reading his word, praying, getting into a fellowship, and serving him, and learning how to cling to him, so that you can have this kind of prayer life like Hannah had, so that you can have this kind of victory when people are persecuting you and irritating you and scorning you, when your husband doesn't fully understand what you're going through and he's a little insensitive. When these different things happen, you will know how to pour your heart out to the Lord and how to pray with open hands, that whatever you're praying for, you will keep your hands open and not claim them to be your own. But whatever God blesses you in, you will continue to give back to the Lord all the days of your life. It's a beautiful way to live, just the Lord blessing and you giving back out to him and to his people. And I pray that for your life. Well, we'll be here again next week, and we'll be doing 1 Samuel chapter 2. So I look forward to hearing from some of you. If you would like to respond to this video, or if you would like to have me send you a book, or just anything at all. And we'll keep going. All these workbooks long, 11 workbooks we're going to go through. And we will do it with the help of the Lord. I'll see all you later. God bless you. Bye.